Two Iraqi-born men who came to the U.S. as refugees have been arrested on terrorism-related charges by federal authorities in Texas and California. And some are arguing that perhaps this is an indication that the screening process for refugees is not stringent enough, that something may be amiss with the screening process. Could you address that?
Well, Kevin, I have seen the announcements from the Department of Justice. Because they have ongoing investigations into these two individuals, I'm not going to be able to discuss specific cases from here. But there are a few things I can say generally that are relevant to that news. The first is that you have heard me on a number of occasions describe how our law enforcement and our national security professionals work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year to keep us safe. And they are incredibly skilled, they're patriotic Americans, and they have access to incredible resources. And they use all of that to keep us safe. And this case, or these cases in particular, are good examples of how the Department of Homeland Security, the intel community, our law enforcement, and other national security agencies work effectively together to keep us safe. When it comes to refugees specifically, this is something that we talked about quite a bit at the end of last year, but there are some relevant facts that do bear mentioning. The first is that no one's allowed to short-circuit the system. The fact is that individuals who are admitted to the United States through the refugee process undergo the most rigorous screening of any individual that enters the United States. That includes careful review of biographic and biometric information that is both reviewed and collected. There are in-person interviews that are conducted. And in the context of that screening process, the burden of proof is on the applicant to demonstrate that he or she is credible, that he or she qualifies for refugee status, and is otherwise eligible to enter the United States. There are a number of reforms that have been added to this screening system over the years that have made this system tighter and better. That includes adding additional databases that are used in the screening process. That means that there are databases that are maintained by the Department of Defense, the National Counterterrorism Center, a variety of other intelligence agencies. There are international law enforcement databases that are also maintained where this information is run through. All of this is an indication of just how thorough that process is. I think the other thing that is relevant here is that means that there are substantial amounts of information about these individuals that is collected. That is information that, if warranted, based on information that's been obtained by law enforcement, that can be then used to investigate individuals. Again, that's not something that you do willy-nilly, or based on a person's identity or their religion, but it is something that it is information that can be used to investigate individuals if their behavior warrants it. Again, as we see in these two cases, we've got law enforcement officials working closely with national security officials to take steps to keep us safe. One last thing. I know that these kinds of situations are likely to prompt calls from the other side that are now familiar, that suggest that the United States should somehow impose some sort of religious test or a test based on an individual's ethnicity to limit their ability to enter the United States. That doesn't represent who we are as a country. And most importantly, it's not going to keep us safe. That is our top priority. That is the top priority of our law enforcement officials. That's the top priority of our national security officials. And that's the top priority of the officials who manage the refugee system. That is, so all of this is consistent with our national security interests and consistent with the kinds of values that the United States has long stood for.
On another topic, some Democratic leaders in Congress are denouncing Homeland Security raids on recent undocumented people from Central America. They've asked the president to stop these raids. Is the president, hearing these concerns? Are there plans to change strategy regarding these raids?
Well, Aisha, we're of course aware of these concerns, but the enforcement strategy and priorities that the administration has articulated are not going to change, and here's why. We have focused those enforcement efforts on high priority areas that we have identified. That is specifically criminals, as you would expect. That's important to keeping our communities safe. That means individuals that have criminal convictions or a criminal history will certainly be prioritized for removal. This is consistent with the way we've described our priorities, that we are seeking to deport felons, not break apart families. The other area of priority that is important is to ensure that we're maintaining security at the border. And that means individuals who have only recently crossed the border are also priorities for removal. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that these enforcement strategies and actions are consistent with the need to follow due process. And each of these individuals is considered on a case-by-case basis for any sort of humanitarian or asylum claims they may have to make. And their legal remedies are exhausted before they are deported. And again, that is an indication that we are committed to working through due process on a case-by-case basis. That's relevant because you actually have a president of the United States who has worked hard to use his own executive authority to try to make that process more fair. After all, there are 700,000 people that have benefited from DACA, these are dreamers. The president has also sought to use his executive authority, and this is an issue that's being litigated in the courts, potentially in front of the Supreme Court later this year, to further expand the group of people who could be given the opportunity to remain in the United States. So certainly the president is aware of this issue, is focused on making sure that we can have a more fair and just immigration system that I think just about everybody who looks at it agrees is broken. And the one way that we could solve this is for Congress to finally take overdue action to reform our broken immigration system. And we know exactly how to get that done. We've got a bipartisan agreement about how to get that done through the United States Senate. But unfortunately, House Republicans blocked that common sense proposal despite the fact that it was supported by Democrats and Republicans all across the country, including leaders in the business community, leaders in the labor community, and leaders in the law enforcement community.
Where are things at in the review of the fiancé visa program?
I don't have an update for you on that process. I can tell you that it's ongoing. This is something that both the Department of State and the Department of Homeland Security are working on together, but I don't have an update for you at this point.